We want to bring in former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst Christy Greenberg. Christy, first, can you walk us through what the Constitution actually says about habeas corpus and whether or not it can be suspended during a time of what is rebellion or invasion, and how you think the courts are going to react to this Trump administration's allegation that we're in a time that justifies suspending this right?
So Article 1 of the Constitution says that writs of habeas corpus are a privilege that shall not be suspended unless there is a case of a rebellion or an invasion that the public safety may require that it be suspended. So again, to state the obvious, there is no rebellion or invasion. Federal judges that have looked at this recently in the case of Tren de Aragua have found there is no invasion. That requires a military component that we have not seen. And public safety plainly does not require suspending habeas corpus. Just taking a step back into what habeas corpus is, all it's saying is that these people who are imprisoned get to challenge the fact that they are being presently detained. And I've responded as a prosecutor to many habeas petitions. Generally, they're filed by the inmates themselves, challenging either their conviction or their sentence. Most of the time, there's not even a hearing. Usually, it's decided on the papers. But I can't imagine a world in which any court would say that this very basic fundamental process of challenging your own detention should be denied because their perception of an immigration problem. And just one last thing, if there is any authority to suspend it, that authority belongs to Congress, not to the president.
Well, you also heard Stephen Miller say it doesn't have to happen if judges do the right thing. How do you interpret that?
Well, again, I think judges would look at history. There have been 4 times in history in which the writ of habeas corpus has been suspended. 3 of those times, there was a specific act of Congress that afforded that. The 4th time where there was no act of Congress, it's because the Congress wasn't in session because there was a civil war. Well, plainly, we are not at war. So I think the courts would look at that history and find plainly that there is no basis to suspend the writ of habeas corpus here.
I also want to ask you what you make of ICE officials arresting the New York mayor at a detention facility. We played some of what Alina Hababa said today regarding that arrest. What is your take on all of that, and whether this is going to be the first in similar cases if you see local officials going out and protesting some of these ICE actions?
Well, Alina Habba's statement stated that the Newark mayor was storming the facility and that he was trespassing, and that the charge apparently was trespassing. I have not seen a criminal complaint or any formal charges that have been made public here, but there is a lot of video that was taken from this incident. You have the Newark mayor and other members of Congress saying nobody was storming any facility. In fact, he was outside of the facility at the time. So given all that video, given all of these witnesses, I think the facts will bear out what actually happened here. But just taking a step back, it's really hard to imagine a circumstance where you're going to have a mayor of a city seeking to look at a facility in his own city and being told that he is not only trespassing, but going to be criminally charged and handcuffed for doing so. This seems like a stretch by any measure.
And in other pressing legal matters, we've got a federal judge in Massachusetts is temporarily blocking the Trump administration from deporting Southeast Asian migrants to Libya. But at the same time, NBC News is learning the Trump administration is planning to charter a plane on Monday to bring white South African refugees to the United States. So could that be used to undercut the administration's argument in court that they are under duress from this onslaught of migration if they are extending, refugee status to a select few from a select country?
Absolutely. And Judge Murphy's order here was very clear. He said that any migrants must be provided at least 15 days to contest their deportations to countries other than the countries that they came from. And so this idea that you would be deporting a number of individuals whose country of origin was in Asia and sending them to Africa without that 15-day process, that would be a clear violation of the court's orders. And so when these lawyers went to the judge stated, yes, you cannot just send them abroad without that process. That would be in violation of my order. I think it's also worth noting why Libya. I mean, Amnesty International has held that Libya is a hellscape. The migration facilities in particular, there is sexual violence of adults and of children. So this seems to plainly be a move to make people scared, have this climate of fear around undocumented immigrants so that they will leave voluntarily. And it's very troubling. What also is troubling is the claims from these lawyers that these migrants were being told that they had to sign away that they would consent to going to Libya, and that if they weren't, they were then put in solitary confinement. That is plainly improper. That is wrong. You can't punish somebody for not agreeing to basically sign your life away, because that's what it would mean to go to Libya. You're either signing yourself away to be tortured, disappeared, or potentially die. So this idea.
The irony, I was the irony there is that Europe is having a migrant influx from Libya, from people trying to escape the dangers and chaos in that country. I also want to ask you, a federal judge is temporarily blocking the president's order to fire more government workers across 21 different departments and agencies. The White House has appealed. So what happens now, and what does that mean for people who were previously fired or pushed out?
So the district court held that the president likely must request congressional cooperation in order to make these kind of large-scale reorganizations of executive branch agencies. And so there's a temporary restraining order in place. That is a temporary order, so it is just going to mean for the next 2 weeks, these large reductions in force are on hold, meaning people will still have their jobs for the next 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, the parties come back. There will be another hearing, a preliminary injunction hearing, to decide whether or not that is more permanent. But as you mentioned, there is an appeal that's being filed of this temporary restraining order, so we'll see what the appellate court says in the interim. But for now, these workers are safe.
All right, Christy Greenberg, thank you so much for all that.